Chapter 6. When Melody finally stumbled out of the bathroom, she forgot her drink, which was just as well. It had done what it was supposed to do in spades. Her entire body felt like it was on a giant rubber band, swinging and swaying under no direct control from her at all. She reached out and touched the wall to steady herself. It didn't help. Sounds, spinning like a funhouse, spiraled at her from the light dancing at the end of the hallway. She raked in ragged breath after ragged breath, trying to stop the spinning. Her heart raced, although she couldn't quite tell why. Pulling her eyes open through the haze that surrounded everything, she concentrated on walking. It took every effort she could muster. For 10 minutes, Blaine had been watching the hookup across the room. Bobby and Fashion Girl. Blaine's gaze kept going nervously to the large opening that led to the hallway. At some point, Melody was going to come back and see them together. He wanted to do something to stop that from happening, but he couldn't think what. Then, before he'd worked all the way through that question, the two of them headed for the door and left. He checked his watch. A frown formed on the end of the numbers. She'd been in there an awfully long time. Maybe someone should go check on her. At that moment, his gaze snagged on the movement at the doorway, and his breath froze in his chest. Blotchy skin, eyes puffy from the tears, swaying like a soft breeze might knock her down, Melody stood there, if it could be called standing. First instinct said get over there, but Jeff Taylor, one of AJ's friends, noticed her first. He stepped up to her, concern etched all over his face. Time stood absolutely still, and then, like a rag doll falling from a shelf, she pitched forward right into Jeff's arms. Jeff caught her as someone standing close to them screamed in surprise. "What, Mel?" AJ rushed past Blaine to get to her. Chaos erupted as partygoers morphed simultaneously into rescue and panic modes. Lifting her gently, Jeff turned. "Clear the couch," he ordered as he carried her limp body over to it. Guests scattered. The coffee table presented only a mild problem. Eve appeared with a pillow, and Jeff laid Melody on it gently. In seconds, the coffee table was across the room, courtesy of 2 big burly firemen. AJ and Jeff knelt next to her, talking softly. Blaine couldn't keep his gaze from her pale skin. Even her hair looked ill. He couldn't move. Not a muscle, not a nerve. Fear gripped him in its icy tentacles. "Mel, baby, come on, sweetheart, talk to me. It's AJ." He was taking vital signs even as he spoke. "Come on, girl, wake up." "What happened?" Eve asked in fear from the other side of the room. Her arms were clamped around her middle. "I just saw her. I just talked to her. She was fine." It was then that Blaine remembered the drink. It was impossible to know, but he had to try. He raced through the room, pushing through the gawking onlookers. He ran down the hall to the bathroom where he flipped on the light. Sure enough, it was right there. He grabbed it and hurried back down the hallway, careful not to spill it on himself. Walking right up to the couch, he held it out to the 2 men kneeling there. She was drinking this. Looking up at him with a concerned but questioning gaze, Jeff took the little punch glass and sniffed it. Then he looked at the contents and frowned deeper. Roofies. "What?" AJ leaned closer and peered in the glass. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." He turned his full attention back to Melody and started shaking her gently. "Mel, come on. Come on, girl, wake up. Say something. Talk to me, Mel. Come on. Please." "Call 911, Jeff commanded, handing the glass back to Blaine. "What?" His brain wasn't processing all of the information coming into it. Jeff took one serious-as-death look at him. "Call 911, now." Disoriented and terror-stricken, Blaine made for the kitchen, wondering how and where he might find a phone. By the time he got there, however, he met the large goateed fireman coming the other way. "They're on their way." On their... Nothing was making any sense to Blaine. Roofies? Melody? How? Why? Then AJ's words from the hallway rang in his head. He almost killed her once. What did that mean? He turned back for the living room, the question swirling in his brain just as it ran into one solid answer. Around the couch stood a circle of concerned faces, each silent, watching, praying, hoping, but disbelieving. Blaine looked at them, the feelings of their panic-stricken faces seared to the insides of him. "Come on, Mel, come on," AJ pleaded at the couch. "Where did Bobby go?" Blaine asked, sidling up to Eve. She shook her head in incomprehension. "I don't know." Then, wide-eyed, she looked at him. "You don't think—" "He probably gave her the drink. Who else could it be?" "But why?" Her gaze fell to the floor, and he knew a recording of AJ's words screamed through her mind. Do you know him?" "No. Unfortunately, or he'd already be on his way to clobber the guy. AJ was right. He was a snake." Anger flowed through Blaine, hot and acerbic as he looked at Melody on the couch. Why had she come with that jerk anyway? A sick feeling crawled through his gut. The wail of the siren outside snapped those thoughts in two. There were more pressing matters at the moment. 2 EMTs came in and got right to work. "We're with the fire department," Jeff said. "We think she ingested roofies. We've got—" He looked around. "Where's that glass?" Blaine grabbed it up and handed it to him. "This is what she was drinking." He pointed to it. "See the flecks at the top?" The EMT nodded. He spoke into his radio, and they went back to get the stretcher. It was all Blaine could do to keep himself back. They knew what they were doing. He didn't. Besides, it wasn't his place, but he couldn't help but wish it was. "You know, it could be hours before she wakes up," Jeff said as he sat down next to Blaine in the waiting area. "You really don't have to stay." "I know, but I kind of feel responsible." Blaine pulled himself forward, torn between staying with her to make sure she was all right and going home to make sure home was all right. "I wish I would have known what was going on when I talked to her before. She kept drinking that junk all while she talked to me. I should have stopped her." Jeff shook his head. He was nice for an older guy. "You can't put that on yourself. You couldn't have known." Swiping at the moisture and fatigue under his eye, Blaine clamped a frown on his face. "Still, I should have." He stretched out his legs and leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes against everything that had happened. How much of his stupidity had caused her to go out with Bobby in the first place? How had she talked herself into that being okay anyway? The doors to the ER swung open, and AJ strode out. He walked right up to Jeff, who stood. Blaine stood too, although warily and hanging back as much as possible. AJ planted his hand on his hip and glanced back at the doors. "They pumped her stomach." The pause came and stayed, lasting far too long. "And?" Jeff asked, glancing at Blaine, clearly wondering how he would keep the two guys standing if the news was as bad as it was sounding. "The alcohol and drugs were all they found. She hadn't eaten in who knows how long. The stuff went right into her bloodstream." AJ spun and put his hands on his head. "That stupid son of a—" "Hey, whoa, calm down." Jeff laid a hand on AJ's shoulder. "Punching walls isn't going to help Melody or anybody else." That only brought pain in place of the anger to AJ's face. Jeff exhaled. "What else did they say?" "The worst is over, they think, although she came awfully close to going into respiratory failure." Kicking the chair, AJ spun and sat down. He put his hand to his head and shoved it through his hair. As much as Blaine hated the guy, it was hard not to feel sorry for him. He obviously cared for Melody a lot. "Did they—" Blaine cleared his throat. "Did they find Wilson?" "On his way back into Houston with Charlotte." AJ sighed, stood up, and paced 3 steps to the window, which twinkled with late-night lights. "Thank God she's all right." Blaine knew it really wasn't his fault, but the guilt hounded him anyway. "I'm really sorry, AJ. If I would have known—" Worried, sad, scared eyes came up to lock with his. The fire in them melted. "Nah, man, it wasn't your fault. Mel's just too darn trusting. Always has been." "This wasn't her fault," Jeff said, jumping instantly to her defense. Jerks like Wilson need to get what's coming to them. Yeah, AJ said. Well, I'd like to dish some of that out myself. You and me both, brother, Jeff said. You and me both. Breathing. It was the first thing Melody was aware of. Breathing, and a deep, bone-numbing heaviness. She fought to open her eyelids, but they just rolled up and right back down. The breaths went out only. They didn't seem to be coming in at all. With effort, she turned her head, but the movement made everything swim. Sick and so tired she could hardly think, she fought not to drift back out. The fog was so thick, she couldn't really hear or see anything. Fear began to creep over her, climbing through her, sweeping what was left of her breath away. What was happening? Where was she? And why couldn't she wake up? Hey there, gorgeous. The voice was right above her, inches from her, and yet she couldn't see it. Instead, it reverberated through her skull. You really had us worried there for a while. She tried to talk, but nothing sensible came out. In fact, nothing sensible was making it from her brain either. She fought not to make it so. The only thing she could grasp at was how much everything hurt. That and how scared she was, and how tired. She tried to push herself up in case wherever this wasn't safe. No, now you stay right there. You're fine. You're safe. It's AJ, and I won't let anything happen to you. The J was there somewhere too, but she forgot it. She squeezed her eyes closed against the incredible pain and dullness shooting through her head. Shh, you just rest. Take your time. It's okay. There was so much more she wanted to ask, to say, but just like that, it was all gone, and the darkness took over once again. From across the room, Blaine watched them. AJ was so good with her, so steady. Jeff, too. They were amazing. He had frozen to the spot the moment trouble struck. He hadn't even been able to make one simple phone call. How useless was that? AJ straightened from the bed. She's asleep again. I think I'll go call Eve, let them know she woke up. Never moving from his spot, Blaine nodded. Jeff had stayed in the waiting room, and AJ stepped out there as well. Seconds, minutes, years passed as Blaine stood gazing at the pale face, the closed eyes, the fall of blonde hair. How had he ever been so blind as to not see her? The memory of her walking into the party earlier played through his mind. Yes, he had to be an absolute idiot not to notice. With a glance at the door to make sure AJ wasn't on his way back in, Blaine gathered his courage and walked the 10 steps to the side of the bed. When he got there, what to do next escaped him. What he wouldn't have given to have the nerves of steel of the other two. Carefully, he reached out and touched the back of her hand that had an IV stuck on top of it. He hated needles. He hated hospitals. But he wasn't going to let that stop him. Hey, Mel. He let out a long breath. This was impossible. What was he supposed to say? Dropping so that he was more leaning on the bed than standing next to it, he slid his hand under hers and closed his eyes. For a long moment, the words were nowhere in his brain. Then, like the sun breaking over the horizon at dawn, they came. God, please be with Melody. Please, she needs you, Lord. We all do. Please guide her back to us. Please, Lord, she needs you. There was a softness beside her now, a haze, but it was a gentle haze. She reached for the only name she could remember. AJ? The haze seemed to move, although she couldn't tell quite how. Hey, Mel, no, it's not AJ. It's Blaine. Blaine? She tried to locate that name in her head. Where was it? It must have fallen to the dark floor along with all the other memories. What? Shh, you're all right. Just rest. But... Did she wake up again? Another presence on the other side of the bed. Melody turned her head that direction, but the movement sent her swirling. It's okay, Mel, the second presence said. It's okay. I'm here. I won't let anything bad happen to you. I swear." It was then that Melody realized something bad must have happened. What was it? A car wreck? A freak accident? She tried to remember, but found only an inky blackness. "Just rest," he said again, and she did. "How long will she be like this?" Blaine asked quietly over the now sleeping Melody. AJ glanced up, and there was disgust in his eyes. "With roofies, it can last like 8 hours. Not like this, but before she's really awake again. But that's not the main concern now." Nothing in him wanted to ask the question, "How's that?" This glance up wasn't any friendlier. Sometimes there's short-term memory loss. It can last a couple days. It took everything for Blaine to fight off the shakiness in him. "But it's not permanent, right?" AJ shook his head. "No, but it can be pretty scary." Blaine let his gaze drop back to her face. Although he didn't say them out loud, the prayers started once more. Melody was full awake now, but the swirling continued. She wasn't at all steady, nor did anything make sense. AJ was there, though. He never left her side. The only time he did, she went into a panic attack, and he was summoned again quickly. That other guy was there, too. Blake, Brian, something like that. He never left either, although she couldn't quite pinpoint why. "Time to get you home, missy." The large black nurse dragged the wheelchair into the room and right up to the bed. "We got your discharge paper signed, and this nice young man has agreed to be your escort." She was glad to see the nurse refer to AJ rather than the sullen, unshaven guy who stood in the corner. Why was he here again? She fought with her memory to piece everything together as AJ helped her from the bed to the wheelchair. The party clothes she had obviously chosen for this strange occasion felt better than the threadbare gown from before. Still, it all seemed somewhat surreal. "You good?" AJ leaned down to her ear. Melody nodded, trying not to move too much. And with that, the little caravan went out to the elevator, down to the lobby, and out the sweeping double doors. The wind was warm and humid, and Melody tried to get it into a category. Too warm for February, too cool for July. What month was it again? She hated feeling like everyone was looking at her and wondering why she couldn't remember such simple things. At the curb, they helped her out of the wheelchair and into a tall silver SUV that she didn't remember ever having seen. She wanted to ask, but decided they would think she was crazy if she did. In the vehicle, she latched her seatbelt while a short conversation passed between AJ and the strange guy. Melody tried not to look, not to stare, not to notice them glancing at her. There was something so familiar about him. What was it? Then AJ hopped in the other side. "Ready?" He looked tired, very tired. Still not trusting herself, Melody simply nodded. Blaine hated the blank look in her eyes. The sparkle was gone, replaced with a fear and a wariness he'd never seen. It unnerved him. The guys said it would fade, that her memory would come back in a day or two, but Blaine had no way of knowing if that was true or not. He carefully pulled out behind the SUV and followed it into traffic. He'd only been to her house twice, and he didn't want to get lost. As he drove, he thought through all that had happened, and he raked his fingers through his hair in frustration. He wondered how she was really feeling, and he wished with everything in him that he could be up there with her in that SUV. It was a wish too great to be hoped for. God, please, please help her through this. "Oh, good, you're home." Her mother met them at the curb. "How are you, sweetheart? AJ called me. He told me what happened. Are you all right?" The questions came at her like bullets from an AK-47, and Melody blinked into the force of them. She was glad when AJ appeared to help her into the house. "She's still a little woozy," he explained, "and she may not remember much for a while. It's what that stuff does." I still can't believe it. Bobby Wilson, Margaret's son? How could he do something like this? They were now at the door, and her mother opened it, the string of words never so much as slowing down. I hope they lock him up and throw away the key, doing this to an innocent young woman. It's just terrible. Why would he do something like this? The room was starting to spin again, and Melody held onto AJ to keep from toppling over. You okay? He asked, and she could see even in her present state the worry etched on his face. Yeah, she rasped. I just want to sit down. Okay, we're almost there. At the couch, he sat her down gently, and it was only when he stepped back that she realized the strange guy had followed them in. Ripping her gaze from him in embarrassment, she pulled in a jagged breath. I think I'll be okay now. Thanks for bringing me home. AJ nodded, then bent down and gave her a hug. Let me know if you need anything, okay? She nodded because that was all she could think to do. What would be really nice was to lean over, stop fighting, and go to sleep. Could we talk in there? AJ asked her mother, and the two of them left the room. It was like being under a microscope with no way to get out. She knew he was watching her, but she didn't have the presence of mind to know what to do about that. He stepped over and sat on the coffee table right in front of her. In the next second, her hands were cradled in his, and his gaze drilled into hers. She looked up, but couldn't quite figure out why anyone would look at her like that. You take care of yourself, okay? He asked. Worry bled through the words. If you need anything, let me know, got it? He reached up and brushed a strand of hair off her forehead. She nodded, kind of. He had nice eyes. They were kind and concerned. She liked those eyes. You get some rest. I'll be praying for you. And with that he stood, leaned over, and kissed the top of her head. This whole thing was so confusing. There was the question of how she got in this state and why they were being so nice to her. Then there was the question of who this guy was and why he was acting like she might die at any moment. It was all one big swirl meant only to keep her guessing. AJ and her mother walked back in, talking quietly. Then AJ addressed the guy with the nice eyes. We'd better go and let her get some rest. Oh, he glanced back down at her. Standing right in front of her, he looked like a giant. Okay. Thanks for getting her home, okay, you two? Her mother followed them to the door, and then they were gone. Melody wanted to understand something about what had just happened, but at that moment, sleep took precedence. She started to lie over onto the couch cushions. Oh, no, you don't, her mother said, pulling her back up. You're going straight to bed, young lady. I'll make you a cheese sandwich and bring it up to you. There was no fight left anywhere in her, so Melody complied like a docile lamb. But you're sure she's going to be okay? Blaine asked, glancing back at the house with worry. Yeah, AJ strode to the silver SUV. Give her a day or two and she'll be the same old Melody. He yanked the door open and crawled inside. See ya. Later, Blaine said, wishing he could go back up to that door without AJ doing what his gaze said he'd like to. The same old Melody? He wondered if that was even possible in his eyes anymore. I don't know, Eve said the following morning as they sat in the break room, her latte never even having been touched. I'm so worried about him. This really rocked his world. Blaine sat in the break room trying to comfort Eve, who was alternately trying to comfort him. How's that? The look on her face was at once distracted and concerned. He came home last night and pounded on those drums until I thought I was going to go insane. He wouldn't talk to me at all. I don't know. It scares me, I guess. He wouldn't... Blaine couldn't even get the right words out. He wouldn't hurt you, would he? Surprise jumped to Eve's face. Hurt me? AJ? No way. But he's so angry. I just don't know how to fix that. Concern for her drifted through Blaine. Well, maybe it's not something to fix. Maybe it's something to let him work through in his own time. Us guys don't like to feel out of control, especially with people we love. Maybe he just needs a little time to get this behind him, and all will be right with the world again. Eve considered that a long moment. Then she looked at him with anxiety in her soft eyes. She was really bad, huh? The question felt like an arrow stabbed straight through the heart, and without knowing it was coming, he stupidly lowered his shield. He nodded slowly. Yeah, she was. Her sigh was soft. I just don't understand why Melody would go out with someone who would do something like that to her. I mean, AJ said... The words trailed off, but Blaine needed to know. AJ said... A conflict of interest battled in her face. Finally, she exhaled long and hard. AJ said Bobby hurt her before. I don't know what that meant exactly, but I can't figure out why she would go out with him again, if that's true. Blaine was battling the same questions. I don't know. I guess some girls like the living on the wild side thing. I can't explain it, but I know it happens. Like dating the guy on the motorcycle who treats them like crap and they all follow him around like little lost puppy dogs. Or the women who keep going back to men who beat the living snot out of them for sport. He let the words trail off. He had to. They were hitting way too close to home. A moment, and Eve looked at her watch. Time to hit the bricks. She stood, and when Blaine stood too, she gave him a quick hug. Thanks. I needed that talk. Anytime. When he got home at 9, Blaine cleared the table and did 2 rounds of dishes. They hadn't been done in a week. His brain slid through everything. Work, school, home, the party, AJ, Eve, Melody. How could one life get so complicated? It was a question he had no answer for. This has been For Real, Book 3, The Courage Series, written by Staci Stallings, narrated by Becky Dowdy. Copyright 2012 by Staci Stallings. Production copyright 2014 by Staci Stallings.
Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel so you never miss a second of the story.